Netflix's The Crown spent 6 seasons peeling back the curtain on the British royal family. Billions of dollars in production, hundreds of hours of research, and yet some of the most jaw-dropping, absolutely unhinged true stories from the monarchy never made it to your screen. Not because the writers didn't know about them, but because they were either too scandalous, too legally dangerous, or frankly too unbelievable for audiences to accept as real. Today we're going deep into the royal vault to uncover the stories that Netflix wouldn't, or couldn't, touch. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why truth really is stranger than fiction when it comes to the Windsors. Let's start with what might be the most heartbreaking and disturbing story the royal family has ever tried to bury. In 1987, a genealogy publication called Burke's Peerage listed two of the Queen Mother's nieces, Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, as dead. There was just one enormous problem. They weren't dead, they were very much alive, locked away in a psychiatric institution called the Royal Earlswood Hospital in Surrey, and they had been there since 1941. Nerissa and Catherine were the daughters of the Queen Mother's brother, John Herbert Bowes-Lyon, and his wife Fenella. Both women had severe learning disabilities, and in 1941, when Nerissa was 22 and Catherine was 15, they were quietly committed to the institution and essentially erased from the family records. But here's where it gets even darker. They weren't alone. 3 other Bowes-Lyon cousins, Idenea, Etheldreda, and Rosemary, daughters of Fenella's sister, were committed to the very same hospital. 5 women from the extended royal family, hidden from public view for decades. The Queen Mother's office later claimed she had no idea her nieces were still alive. But investigative journalists found that the hospital had never once received a visit, a letter, or a Christmas card from any member of the royal family. When Nerissa actually died in 1986, she was buried in a grave marked with nothing but a serial number and plastic tags. No name, no flowers, no family present. Catherine lived until 2014, spending over 70 years institutionalized. The Crown briefly nodded to this story in Season 4, but they dramatically softened it, focusing mostly on Princess Margaret's reaction and glossing over the sheer scale of the cover-up. The real story is far more chilling than anything that made it to screen, and it raises deeply uncomfortable questions about how the royal family treated its most vulnerable members well into the modern era. Now, the Crown did address Edward VIII's Nazi sympathies. We all remember that, but what the show presented was essentially the PG version of a story that goes so much deeper it would make your head spin. Yes, the show covered the Duke and Duchess of Windsor's infamous 1937 visit to Germany, where they met Hitler. What it left out was the staggering amount of evidence suggesting Edward actively worked against British interests during World War II. Declassified documents, including the so-called Marburg files captured by Allied forces in 1945, revealed that the Nazis had a concrete plan called Operation Willy to kidnap or recruit Edward as a puppet king if Germany successfully invaded Britain. And the terrifying part? Multiple intelligence reports suggested Edward might have been a willing participant. In 1940, while stationed in Portugal, Edward allegedly told a known Nazi sympathizer that sustained heavy bombing would force England to make peace. He reportedly leaked Allied military plans to the enemy through intermediaries. Winston Churchill was so alarmed that he essentially exiled Edward to the Bahamas as governor, not as an honor, but to get him as far from Europe as physically possible. After the war, the British government went to extraordinary lengths to suppress these documents. General Eisenhower himself was involved in the decision to classify the Marburg files, and the royal family reportedly lobbied to keep them sealed permanently. They were eventually published in 1957, but even then the full picture was carefully managed. The Crown touched on Edward's Nazi connections, sure, but presenting the genuine possibility that a former King of England may have committed treason during his country's darkest hour. That was apparently a bridge too far, even for Netflix. Let's talk about Prince Philip, because the Crown treated him with remarkable restraint, considering what the rumor mill has churned out for decades. The show hinted at marital tensions, and there was that wonderful storyline about the Thursday Club, but it pulled every single punch when it came to the persistent allegations about Philip's personal life outside the marriage. The Thursday Club was a real luncheon gathering at a Soho restaurant that included actors, photographers, writers, and aristocrats. It was known for raucous behavior and was described by members themselves as a forum for escapism. One of its members was Stephen Ward, who would later become the central figure in the Profumo affair, one of the biggest political scandals in British history. Ward was a society osteopath who introduced powerful men to young women, and his circle overlapped directly with Prince Philip's social world. When the Profumo scandal broke in 1963, there was genuine panic at Buckingham Palace. A police investigation reportedly uncovered a photograph that placed Philip in extremely compromising circumstances, though this has never been officially confirmed, and the image, if it existed, has never surfaced. The Queen's own biographer, Sarah Bradford, wrote openly that Philip had relationships with other women, stating it was essentially accepted within their social circle. Pat Kirkwood, a famous actress of the 1950s, was linked to Philip for years and spent much of her later life trying to get the palace to officially deny the rumours, which they never fully did. The Crown could have dedicated entire episodes to this material. Instead, it treated Philip's alleged wanderings as vague, almost poetic marital struggles. The real story, filled with named individuals, specific incidents, and documented panic within the establishment, was apparently too explosive for a show that already had the palace's lawyers watching every frame. Here's one that almost nobody talks about, and it's genuinely astonishing. When the Queen Mother died in 2002, at the age of 101, she was the most beloved member of the royal family. Grandmotherly, charming, adored by the British public. What most people didn't know was that she was also wildly, almost incomprehensibly, in debt. The Queen Mother had an overdraft at Coutts Bank, the royal bank, that was estimated at somewhere between £4 and £7 million. She was a legendary spender who loved horse racing, fine dining, expensive gin, and maintaining multiple lavish residences. Her staff numbered in the hundreds, her entertaining budget was astronomical. She bet heavily on horse races and maintained a racing stable that consistently lost money. And yet none of this was really her money. The Queen Mother's lifestyle was funded by the civil list, which is essentially the taxpayer, and supplemented by the Queen herself, who reportedly covered her mother's debts repeatedly out of the privy purse. When journalists tried to investigate the Queen Mother's finances in the 1990s, they were met with a wall of silence. The palace treated any inquiry into her spending as practically treasonous. Here was this symbol of wartime resilience and British stoicism, quietly burning through millions of pounds of public money on champagne and horse bets. It's not a dark story exactly, but it's the kind of humanizing, slightly absurd detail that would have added incredible texture to the crown. And yet, the show presented the Queen Mother as almost saintly, never once addressing the spectacular financial chaos she left behind. In November 1992, a fire broke out at Windsor Castle, eventually destroying or damaging over 100 rooms. The Crown covered this event, but it missed what made the fire truly significant in the story of the modern monarchy. When the government initially announced that taxpayers would foot the estimated £40 million repair bill, the British public revolted. This was the moment the social contract between the monarchy and the people genuinely cracked. For the first time in modern history, ordinary citizens openly asked why they should pay to repair a castle for a family that paid no income tax and lived in unimaginable wealth. The backlash was so fierce and so immediate that it forced the Queen to agree to pay income tax for the first time, and to open Buckingham Palace to tourists to raise money, something previously unthinkable. The Crown treated the fire as a personal tragedy for the Queen, a metaphor for her horrible year. But the real story is about a fundamental shift in power between the British people and their monarchy. It was the moment when deference died, when the public stopped automatically accepting that royalty deserved special treatment. That political earthquake, that genuine constitutional tremor, deserved far more attention than a few scenes of the Queen looking sad in the wreckage. So why didn't the Crown tell these stories? Some were likely too legally risky, others might have been seen as too cruel or too politically sensitive. And some were probably just too complicated to fit neatly into a television narrative. But here's the thing, these aren't just gossip. These are stories about power, accountability, secrecy, and the extraordinary lengths an institution will go to protect its image. They remind us that the real British monarchy is far more complex, far more flawed, and far more fascinating than any dramatization could ever capture. The Crown was brilliant television, but it was still television. The truth, as always, is wilder. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these stories shocked you the most? And are there other royal scandals you think deserved a place in the Crown? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you learned something new today, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell so you never miss a deep dive like this one. I'll see you in the next video.